It's a magpie. Just one. Well, my dad was a Geordie from Newcastle, yeah. He's the inspiration for the series. He moved down in the 70s. Started out by hitchhiking. Yeah, he'd hitchhike down on a Thursday, work the weekend at the pubs in Paddington and go back the Monday. London pubs were busier than the North East and it was cash in hand, which was probably very illegal. The story goes that after one busy weekend, he got back to Newcastle to find the flat empty. His wife had just packed up and left. No note, no explanation, nothing. Mad. No idea how he managed to sort himself out, but after a couple of weeks he decided to move down for good. It wasn't long until he met Mum, and the rest is history. I had no idea of any of this. Not until his wake, when his sister, who was pretty sloshed, told me the whole story like it was common knowledge or something. I found out loads about him that day. His other, slightly less pissed sister gave the eulogy. She talked about how Nan had him when she was 16, and his brother the year later. I think Grandad up and left, and obviously Nan was too young to have two little ones. She couldn't cope on her own. I think she had a breakdown. If it was today, you'd call it a breakdown. They ended up in a children's home until Dad was 5. By then, his mum had found her feet again, so she took them back in. All this was in the eulogy. Not the bit about the breakdown, but Dad's bravery, the children's home, and how he looked after my uncle. Didn't know any of this. He never spoke about his childhood or anything, really. You never think about your parents having whole lives before you were born, you know? He had all this inside him and he just carried it around. Was he okay? He seemed it. I hope he was. I should have asked when I had the chance. There's loads I don't have a clue about. Like his favourite song or book or film. I left home at 18 and we never really had those chats. He worked loads, and then at uni I was only home for Christmas, sometimes birthdays. When I did see him, he was only interested in how much I was making in tips at my restaurant job. He never asked about photography. Don't even know the last photo we have of us together. I'm named after him. He was Matthew Peter Dixon and I'm Peter Matthew. I've always been proud of that. I'm the youngest. 2 older brothers. We grew up on an estate in West London, right in the middle of all the mansion blocks near Warwick Avenue, long before that bloody song. When we were kids, Dad used to take me and my middle brother to the posh bit of Maida Vale to do Penny for the Guy. You know, for Guy Fawkes. In the run-up to bonfire night, we'd be there every day after school. Make about £100 most years. We'd use all our earnings to do a little firework display on our estate. Easiest money I've ever made. As soon as I went to secondary, that had to stop. Didn't want to be seen begging. It wasn't begging, but you know what I mean. He worked as a porter in a plush block of flats near Paddington. Mum used to clean the flats too, so whenever I pulled a sickie from school, which was quite often, I'd sit with Dad until Mum was done. When the tenants walked by, Dad would say, "I've got my bodyguard with me today." They'd always laugh. Sometimes they'd even give me £5 for nothing, other than being a chubby kid who had bunked off school. Probably explains all the bunking. As a family, we weren't that close. We didn't talk about how we felt. Not because it made you weak or anything like that. We didn't talk about stuff. Not like my uni mates. Fuck. Their families freak me out, to be honest. Like, there are some things you just shouldn't talk to your parents about. Definitely not. 100% not who you're shagging. So weird. Birthdays weren't a big deal. Presents were usually a few 20s in a card that read, "To Peter, love Mum and Dad." And once Santa was ruined for me at the ripe old age of 7, mean brothers, Christmases kind of came and went without much fanfare. It was pink turkey crowns, burnt beef joints, and arguments about what to watch on the telly. One good thing about Dad was he was the easiest to buy presents for. A Parker pen or a new pair of slippers, simple. When I became a teenager, he started to embarrass the fuck out of me. Whenever I had mates over, he'd sing at the top of his lungs in the bath or ask them all, without fail, whether they'd ever farted in a bottle. And no matter their response, he'd just kind of nod his head and smile. So embarrassing. He taught me loads. How to save money. He was crafty with money. Kind of like a magpie, actually. He was always finding coins and bits. He taught me to play poker. We used to play it all the time. Till I got too good. Feel guilty for taking all his change. Mum reckons it was work that kept him going. He worked right up until his 70th birthday. All the tenants threw a big leaving do for him. I couldn't make it. He was diagnosed a month after he retired, and it took over pretty quick. Lungs, liver, blood. I only saw him 3 times after that. When he found out, once after chemo, which was hard, and about a week before he died. He looked better. Normal, even. I remember he said, "Keep your head down. You'll be all right, kid." I was on my way to work. Called Mum on the off chance for a chat. He'd collapsed and was being taken to hospital. I was the last to arrive. My brothers and Mum stood around his bed. He was asleep. Mum shouted, "Look, Matt, Peter's here." And he woke up and looked straight at me. He reached out his hand. I grabbed it. And I think I stupidly asked if he was all right. That was the first thing that slipped out of my mouth. I sat with him while my brothers smoked a spliff outside the room. Mum looked like she'd been crying all day. We started to share stories about him. Chip butties. How he wouldn't let us watch anything when the horse racing was on. And if we tried to change the channel, he'd shout all our names. "Robert, James, Peter." Like his rage would make him lose his memory. "For God's sake, man." How he'd superglue a quid onto the pavement outside the bookies and watch from behind his paper as people struggled to whack it loose. We laughed a lot. It was nice. Not nice, but we were all there together. For the first time in ages. I never asked Dad what it was like to have someone walk out on him. But when he died, we were all there together. It was what he deserved. He went. Have you ever seen someone take their last breath? It's... yeah. Mum went off to sign some papers or something, and I sat with my oldest brother. Silent at first. What can you say? Then, after a minute, he said, "Weird, innit?" It was. The next morning, I made a coffee and sat to do some edits. Stared at the screen in front of me, but couldn't. Didn't see the point. I closed my laptop, sat on my window ledge and stared out at the block opposite mine. It had rained the whole day before, but it was a bright morning, really clear. It made me feel more calm, but I kept thinking about Dad lying in that hospital bed. He was gone. I was crying. I wanted to thank him for dusting himself off and carrying on, for being brave. Because if he hadn't, I wouldn't be here. Then, right at that second, a magpie perched on one of the balconies opposite. Just one. Couldn't believe it. The timing. I grabbed my camera to take a couple of quick shots before he flew off, but look. He's looking straight down the lens. At me. Like, he knew I was taking the photo. It sounds silly, but I think it was him. Dad. Coming to check up on me. Or something.